You step into an elevator. Someone else is already inside. You nod. You look at the floor numbers. Your heart rate ticks up, just slightly, and you don't know why. You tell yourself it's nothing. It's just a stranger. But the real answer is far stranger. Your brain is not looking at a person. It's running a background check that started 300,000 years ago, and it has never stopped running. Your ancestors lived in groups of about 50 people, sometimes fewer. Everyone in that group had a face you knew, a voice you recognized, a smell that meant safety. Anyone outside that circle was a question mark, and a question mark on the savannah could kill you. So your brain built a filter. Known face, relax. Unknown face, brace. That filter is still installed. It just runs on modern hardware now, in elevators and subway cars and grocery store lines. Here's the part that feels strange. Your amygdala, the almond-shaped alarm system deep in your brain, cannot tell the difference between a stranger who wants to rob you and a stranger who is simply also waiting for the bus. It only knows unfamiliar. And unfamiliar to an ancient nervous system means unsafe until proven otherwise. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux spent decades mapping this exact circuit. He found that the amygdala receives raw sensory information before your rational brain even gets a chance to weigh in. A stranger's face reaches your fear response faster than it reaches your conscious thought. You feel the flicker of unease before you've decided there's anything to be uneasy about. That's not a flaw. That's a design. Your ancestors who hesitated around unknown faces lived longer than the ones who didn't. The cautious ones passed on their caution. You are, quite literally, descended from the nervous ones. But it gets stranger still. Your brain doesn't just flag strangers as unfamiliar. It actively tries to read them in milliseconds, using almost nothing. Psychologist Nalini Ambady demonstrated this with a series of experiments now famous in social psychology. She showed people silent video clips of teachers, just 2 seconds long, no sound at all. Then she asked viewers to rate those teachers on competence and warmth. Those 2-second silent judgments matched the ratings from students who had spent an entire semester with the same teachers. 2 seconds, no words, nearly the same conclusion as 16 weeks of experience. Your brain calls this instinct. It's actually ancient math. Fast, cheap, often right, sometimes catastrophically wrong. Think about that the next time a stranger sits next to you and you decide, before they've said a single word, whether they seem friendly or unsettling. You didn't choose that impression. Your brain handed it to you, already finished, like a note passed under a desk. And this thin slicing doesn't stop at competence and warmth. It reaches further than you'd like to admit. Within a fraction of a second, your brain also rates a stranger's face for trustworthiness, dominance, even likability, all before a single word gets exchanged. Psychologists call this process trait inference, and studies using face rating experiments have shown that people arrive at nearly identical trustworthiness judgments whether they view a face for a full second or for just a tenth of a second. A tenth of a second. That's less time than it takes to blink. Your rational mind likes to believe it evaluates people carefully, weighing evidence, reserving judgment. Your amygdala never got that memo. It made its decision before your rational mind even opened the file. Why does this matter now, in a world where you pass hundreds of strangers before lunch? Sociologist Stanley Milgram had a name for this exact problem. He called it urban overload. Your ancestors met maybe 1,000 new faces across an entire lifetime. You might pass that many new faces before your coffee gets cold. Milgram argued that city dwellers develop a kind of protective numbness, a way of filtering out most strangers just to keep the nervous system from firing on all cylinders, all day, every day. That's why you don't make eye contact on the subway. That's why you stare at your phone in line. It isn't rudeness. It's a coping mechanism your brain invented because the ancient stranger alarm was never built for this much stimulation. Picture your ancestor at the edge of the firelight, counting silhouettes in the dark. 2 shapes, 3, each one evaluated individually with full attention. Now picture your own morning commute. Dozens of faces in a single subway car. Hundreds more on the platform. Your ancient alarm system was calibrated for 2 shapes in the dark, not 200 shapes in fluorescent light. Something had to give. So your brain quietly rewrote its own rules, without asking permission, and decided that most strangers simply don't count as data worth processing. But the alarm doesn't turn off completely. It just gets quieter. And every so often, something breaks through the numbness and the old system flares back to life. A stranger stands too close. A stranger holds eye contact a second too long. Suddenly, you're not in a modern city anymore. You're back on the savannah, and your body knows it before your mind catches up. Here's where the story gets its twist. You'd think the safest move is to avoid strangers altogether. Keep your head down. Trust no one you haven't met. But research tells a completely different story. Psychologist Nicholas Epley ran a study on Chicago commuters that upended what most people assumed about strangers. He asked one group to ride the train in total silence, as usual. He asked another group to strike up a conversation with the stranger sitting next to them. Almost everyone predicted the silent ride would feel better. Almost everyone was wrong. The people who talked to strangers reported a more positive commute than the people who sat in silence, and the effect held up again and again. Ask yourself why that result feels surprising at all. If strangers were simply dangerous, avoiding them should feel like relief. It doesn't. It feels like relief for about 10 minutes, and then it starts to feel like isolation. Epley's commuters didn't expect the conversation to go well. Many of them dreaded it beforehand. Afterward, they couldn't stop describing it as one of the better parts of their day. Your brain fears the stranger and craves the connection at the very same time. That tension is not a contradiction, it's the entire point. Because here is the truth your ancient alarm system never learned. For most of human history, strangers weren't only threats. They were also the only way your ancestors' small, isolated groups survived long droughts, disease, and disaster. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have found that distant, unfamiliar tribes were often the very lifeline that saved a starving group. A stranger might carry news of water. A stranger might carry a mate for your children, widening a gene pool that inbreeding would otherwise collapse. A stranger might carry an idea, a tool, a fire-making trick your own group never discovered. So the 50 people you knew kept you alive day to day. But the strangers, the ones your amygdala still fears, are often the reason your bloodline exists at all. Anthropologist Kim Hill spent years studying groups like the Ache and the Hadza, hunter-gatherer societies that still preserve traces of how humans lived for most of their history. His research found something researchers didn't expect. Even small, seemingly isolated bands maintained wide social networks that stretched across dozens of unrelated, unfamiliar groups. Strangers weren't the exception in ancestral life. They were the safety net underneath it. When your own group's hunt failed, when disease swept through your valley, when the rains didn't come, it was the unfamiliar tribe 3 ridgelines away that determined whether your bloodline continued or ended. Your nervous system inherited half the story and forgot the other half. It remembers that strangers can be dangerous. It forgot that strangers built civilization. Every trade route in human history was walked by strangers meeting strangers. Every language spread because someone unfamiliar showed up somewhere new and stayed long enough to be understood. Every city on Earth is, at its core, millions of strangers who agreed, without ever discussing it, to stop treating each other as threats long enough to build something together. Your nervous system is still catching up to that agreement. Consider how strange your daily life would look to an ancestor watching over your shoulder. You board a plane and sit shoulder to shoulder with 300 strangers for 6 hours, and mostly you fall asleep. You hand your house key to a stranger who fixes your plumbing while you're at work. You let a stranger cut your hair with a blade an inch from your throat, and you tip generously afterward. None of this would have made sense to the people whose brains built your alarm system, and yet you do it constantly, almost without a flicker of the fear those same brains still generate in an elevator. That contradiction is worth sitting with. Somewhere between the ancient alarm and the modern world, you built an entire second system, a set of social contracts, uniforms, name tags, licenses, and reputations, whose entire purpose is to convince your ancient brain that this particular stranger has already been vetted. The pilot's uniform does the work your ancestors' 50-person tribe used to do. The doctor's white coat does it. The delivery uniform at your door does it. Civilization, in a sense, is just a very elaborate machine for making strangers feel familiar enough that your amygdala finally exhales. But strip away the uniform, the context, the reason to trust, and you're back in the elevator, alone with someone whose face gives you nothing to go on. And your ancient alarm, denied its usual shortcuts, reaches for the only tool it has left: caution. So the next time you feel that small flicker in an elevator or that tightening in your chest on a crowded train, notice it without believing it completely. That flicker is not telling you the truth about the person standing near you. It's telling you the truth about the world your ancestors survived. A smaller, more dangerous world that has mostly disappeared. You are not weak for feeling it. You are wired for a world that no longer exists in the same shape. And maybe that's the real reframe. The stranger who unsettles you in the elevator is running through the same ancient filter, sizing you up in the same 2 seconds, feeling the same small current of unease. Two nervous systems, both trained by the same ancient world, both quietly bracing for a threat that almost never comes. Somewhere underneath that bracing is the other inheritance, the one your amygdala never got the memo about. The one that whispers, faintly, underneath the fear, "This stranger might be worth knowing." You step into an elevator. Someone else is already inside. You nod. And for a moment, without knowing it, you are standing at the exact same crossroads your ancestors stood at 100,000 years ago, deciding, in silence, whether this stranger is the danger your body remembers or the connection your species was actually built for.